mobile health and health it takes a village. It really takes a village to get anything done. And every word that I'm going to say today has the fingerprints of my team members all over it. And many of my team members are here today, including Eric and Pidget and Ben and Daniel. And so I always put this slide first because, you know, when you get to the end of your talk, you're in a hurry and you forget this slide. So here it is. These are the great minds that are. So everything I say that's stupid is my fault, and everything I say is smart is theirs. All right. So the road to outcomes is through precise specification of behavior and the determined behavior and the mechanisms of change or mechanisms of action of that behavior, as Bill said, and the context of that behavior. So I am an obesity researcher, so I'm going to use that as an example. And the causes of obesity, I always think of it as a chair, as that stress, sleep, exercise, and diet, right? So these are behaviors that I could possibly try and tackle, and these are big behaviors. So when I say diet, if I'm going to tackle all of diet, I can go home now, but maybe I'll tackle salt or sugar, probably sugar. So all of these are big umbrellas under which are precise behaviors. So when you're trying to change your behavior, you need to specify, be very specific what you want to change. Don't fight all the battles, and then know how to measure, how you're going to measure that behavior in context, because context is king. So what Bill said about theory and how we are all theorists, the reason that it's so important to choose a behavioral theory and specify it up front is because you got to measure it. And because if you don't explicitly say what you think is at work here, you're all going to implicitly have different ideas. And that's going to make it very hard to work as a team, in particular because engineers and doctors think differently about behavior than, for instance, me as a psychologist, right? So many things influence behavior, your emotion, cognition, what you're thinking. These are different things. Don't listen to the cognitive mafia. We're not all cognition. Thank you. You know, your personal characteristics, personality, but, you know, so social economic status, many things. Social environment, the natural and built environment, you know, the macro scale social environment that we're in right now, which we will not discuss today because can't do it. And your own behavior. One of the biggest predictors of your behavior is what you did yesterday, which is kind of depressing when you think of it. And your genes, of course, to some extent, and your metabolic health. So one of the big things that's been left out of psychosocial theory again and again is your body and how that impacts your behavior, right? So in some of our early work, we found that kids who were insulin resistant already tended to be less active, and activity dropped off more sharply as girls who were overweight, but in particular insulin resistant, passed through puberty. So these are the things that you have to think about. You can't fight all these battles in the same intervention. You have to decide what you have to pick a theory, pick the parts of it that you want to use, and measure it well, as Bill said. Here's a nice book. You can also get it online. Susan Mickey has put together this really great catalog of all sorts of behavior, of almost all the behavioral theories. And there's also this behavior change wheel, which sort of gives you more than the truth. It gives you a way of thinking about how to use behavioral theories in a behavior change intervention when you're really trying to get at the mechanism of the thing that's going to change that behavior. So some key terms. A theory, what we've been talking about up until now, is a formalized set of concepts. It organizes observations and inferences, and it explains and really describes, not so much predicts, behavior and outcomes. It's called a conceptual model. You've seen it a million times. It's balls and arrows. I'm sort of over them. It's a good way to start, right? But what you need, I think, now that we can do this, what we're starting to be able to do this through mobile health technologies, through temporally dense, always-on measures, is these empirical, quantifiable, testable versions of a theory, something that you can measure and something that you can disprove, because most of the theories that we use today have never been fully tested. because they're too big, right? A construct. That's a hypothetical explanatory concept. It's not directly observable. For instance, intelligence. I mean, you all think that you can observe intelligence, but you can't. Motivation, fear, anger. We think we know what we see because of what Bill said about us, our common sense addictions. But a variable is when we take these things and make them measurable. And this is what you are going to need to figure out how to do during this time, our time together. And very important is thinking about the mechanism of change or the mechanism of action. What is it that really changes behavior? What's the real active ingredient, right? So the problem with theories is that we see a lot of correlational research saying that, wow, my self-efficacy changed and this behavior changed, maybe 5% of the variance usually. But is that a mechanism of change, or how's that happening in time? So we can now know that using real-time technology. So I forget why this is in here. It's my favorite theory. Yes, I'm going to move on. It's a good theory, and you have to pick a theory. So I'm picking this one. So I know this is in here. This is the baby. Don't throw it out with the bathwater. All of our theories are wrong, but we got to start somewhere. There's some really good basic-ish research on particularly a theory like this. So as we move forward and our theories become models, we will look like my friend. I'm not sure I can even tell this story. I'll get to it later. But what's wrong with these theories? And I think Bill was starting to get at this. And you've seen this slide a million times, so close your eyes. So this theory says relatedness, autonomy, control, and support leads to perceived competence and self-regulation. This leads to motivation to change my behavior, which leads to behavior change. What's wrong with this theory? It's a one-way ticket from A to B. Now, that is not how my behavior works. My behavior is loopy. And I think everybody's behavior is loopy. Okay, Eric, you can close your eyes for this one. Let's talk about my behavior. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. Yes. So chocolate consumption. Here on this axis is time. And on this axis is going to be how badly I want chocolate consumption and a few other things. So my desire to eat chocolate, dark chocolate only, changes during the day, right? So it might have started with wanting it really badly, and by the end of the day, it's like, eh. But what happens if you put my proximity to chocolate into the mix? And that changes over time too, right? So let's say this morning chocolate was a little bit out of reach, and I wanted it, but I know it's bad for me, although that doesn't really change my behavior. And during the day, all of this changes, and in the evening, I really want chocolate, and I can there's a bowl right near my chair. What's going to happen? Am I going to eat chocolate? Yes! Okay, you guys are with me. Now, let's add stress. I'm a stress eater. The more stress, the more chocolate. Easy equation. Okay, so this particular evening, I don't really want chocolate, and I'd have to get up and go to the kitchen. However, I'm feeling somewhat stressed. I give myself a 70% chance of eating chocolate, right? But that's because I know about the time and the context. All right, let's add my friend Darcy. Now, Darcy loves chocolate too, dark chocolate. And so here we are. It's the morning. My desire to eat chocolate by the afternoon is high, but I would have to go into the kitchen and too lazy. However, I'm feeling a little bit stressed, and then Darcy drops by. What's going to happen?
Chocolate party.
Chocolate party. Yes. So you see, I could fill my entire talk with this by adding variables, but I won't. But you get the idea. So there's these new guiding principles for continuous behavioral and physiological monitoring and momentary self-report through wearables, deployables, invisibles, chemical sensing, digital breadcrumbs. Everybody know what that is? Yeah. I used to give talks so people didn't know. You don't know that. Okay, digital breadcrumbs is like my search history. but like everything that I have on my phone, everything that I have on my computer, my purchase history through Amazon. How many of you have Amazon Prime? Amazon Prime knows more about you than your spouse. So that's your digital breadcrumb. And this gives us a new way of understanding people in real time. I'm not even going to go over this, but these new technologies are data hungry and they are ubiquitous and they're with us all the time. My phone is over there only because I was afraid I would start to check my email during my talk. That's as far as my phone is ever away from me, right? And it's got all this data on it, all this amazing data, and it's integrated with wearables. I'm wearing 3. I'll just show you the one that's proper to show you, so it means not only can I get data from you, but you can push data out to me, and I can push data or questions to you, right? I can give you a nudge, right? These things are now allowing us to think about behavior dynamically, in real time, and in context. And as I said, context is king. So a dynamic model takes into account momentary and longitudinal changes in relationships between context, within person fluctuation, and the influence of shifting contexts on the need. So now I'm going to show a slide that's really Daniel and Eric's, and this is more what we're looking for. And you guys will hear more about this, and I'm not going to explain dynamic modeling to you today because other people are going to do it better than I do. But the idea is that these are like little swimming pools full of water. This behavior, if you get outcome expectancies or cues to action or any of the suffix coming into this, at some point it's a tipping point, and that behavior will change, or a behavior will happen. And that changes the day, right? How am I doing?
That's one good way. I'll talk more about it. So.
Yes. So some key questions that you need to ask. What are your specific health? Now I'm setting you up for your groups, right? What are your specific outcomes of interest? Which population do you want to study? Don't try and study the whole world because determinants are going to be very different depending on where and with whom you're working. And behaviors and determinants often differ across populations. So culture, country, socioeconomic status, age, cognitive development, all of these things are going to influence how you make your choices. And which behaviors are related to the chosen outcome? Choose your battles. Where possible, make those battles evidence-based. But because we're in this brave new world, and I do think the paradigm is changing, we have to sort of reinvent some wheel. So use the evidence where it's there, and where it's not, we just got to go forward. So the key question is the deeper what. Which determinants are related to these behaviors, but what are the mechanisms of change? Now we can actually know that in real time. What's the thing that's tipping the behavior? If you go back to, if you define your buckets in that water model, well, you're going to be able to see what actually tips the scale. What is it? Or it's going to be a combination of things. It's going to be assays. Let's talk about that later. And this larger framework, I reverently ripped off from Bonnie Spring. Just don't forget that you are in a big world. And, there's different ways to attack a problem, and there's different things influencing that problem. And you're not going to be able to choose them all, but be cognizant of the fact that, this ecological intervention framework is going to be the best one. You want to say anything else about that? It's your slide. Okay. Paring it down. Which constructs, behaviors, outcomes to intervene on, and thus measure. So mechanisms of change, you can only know about them if you measure them. So it's going to be a best guess up front, right? And how do you measure them? And that's a transdisciplinary collaboration, because you can measure stuff that you never expected to measure before. And there are new ways to define old concepts, and I will get to that in a moment. And what's the timing, frequency, and context of measurement? And that's going to be different for different variables. Which technologies to use? Where can you measure ubiquitously? So where do you not have to ask? And where do you have to ask? And this is something that we differ on often in my various teams. So, and one of my favorite examples of that is the idea of stress. Many of the engineers that I work with are still trying to measure stress with sensors. And we're still trying to measure stress with salivary cortisol and alpha amylase. This assumes that stress has the same fingerprint across people. And I'm not so sure. So I've gone back to thinking, we're measuring something, because even in the lab, I don't know about you, but my correlations between salivary cortisol and self-reported stress are 0.2 to 0.4 in the lab, in a controlled situation, when stressing my people. So, they're related, but they're not the same thing. So you have to decide, and you also have to choose your battles there, because ubiquitously is really, if it's easy, which cortisol is not. But if you can measure ubiquitously and it's easy, maybe you take that relationship, you take a hit. But it's all choices you have to make. And what do you want to do on demand? So using ecological momentary assessment, which is asking people questions on their phone or on their watch. And what about validated measures? So we have validated questionnaire measures that have been validated on white college students across the country. How valid is that? And also, they are one-off questionnaires. So your study sections are still going to be screaming about, is it validated? But we're just reaching the skin, just finding out what do you mean by validated, and what do we do with the fact that we're often doctors and lawyers and people trust these legacy measures, but what if our measures are better? So I've led whole discussions on this. I have no answers. Just something you got to think about. And there is a role of more traditional measures. There is a role of a trait rather than a state. And you have to decide which you want and when you want it. Not everything's got to be measured in real time. God forbid you to have to measure metabolic health in real time all the time. I mean, you suck your patients dry, all the blood, all the time. I've done that, yes. Okay, new technologies are not magic. There's best practices, develop, design, and deployment. And if text messaging only, if it wasn't embedded in just, well thought out, empirically driven, theoretically good design, could really change people's behavior, I would be out of a job, which would be fine with me. Technology can add fundamental knowledge on behavior and vice versa. Otherwise, we just have toys. Technology is not magic. All right. Theories, models drive which behaviors to measure, the help of best measures, and the understanding of mechanisms of change. I'm beginning to sound like a broken record. So you need expertise in specific populations on your team. Targeting, tailoring, participatory design is super important. When you're going into a population and you're going to be using new technologies, you've got to find out what's acceptable to them and what's not. And that changes over time. So the research that I did in 2008 with overweight Hispanic and African American kids on what they were willing to wear is not going to be what they're willing to wear now. I can tell you that. And you've got to motivate people to give you their data. We're asking a lot of them. So how do you motivate people to be part of this new technological storm when the more and less that they understand what it means to give us their data all the time? So this is a really quick case study, super quick. How am I doing on time? Never mind. I'm just going to run through. This is the study I was talking to you about in 2008, which is the mobile phones we were using were the Nokia. They were bricks. But the kids had never had them. They were super excited to have them. We did in 2008. I thought, will they wear an accelerometer on their waists or, and we could get these new, really pretty little accelerometer watches. They were fancy for that time. And we thought, that's what they're going to want. Kids did not want anything that was seeable. So we ended up using these heart rate monitors that you wear under your clothes, but there was a light that if it blinked, and if it was blinking, that meant that it was attached to the phone so that we could know. Anyway, the girls loved that. They ended up wearing like white t-shirts to school and this blinking thing. It was kind of crazy. So they had the blinky thing and an accelerometer and this phone that we gave them. And this was the whole idea. This was before Brittany Belcher's fantastic research on sedentary breaks and how a half an hour is too long. So I'm going to make you guys all stand up in a minute. But this was at the time the lore, and after 2 hours of sedentary time, they had to stand up. That was the idea. And they had, so this is their 2-hour watch face, and when it got to 140 minutes, we were in the back end. We could see that, and we would start beeping them. And then it was motivational interviewing, all done with the Wizard of Oz by my students. And this was all theory and evidence guided choices, and it was the first just-in-time adaptive intervention in kids, and it maps onto Billy's talk, but I'm not going to do that because that's Billy's talk. This is what we did, and it worked, but that's not but that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to tell you that how important it is to involve the people that you're going to be working with ahead of time. So our theories, here's the big challenge. Our theories are not up to the task. Bill Riley's 2011 article is a must-read, amazing article. And so this is another example. This is example 2, M2-Fed, or monitoring and modeling family eating dynamics. The whole thing was based on the fact, and this is an ongoing project, NSF-funded, and it's based on the fact that we don't know what people eat. After years of trying to figure that out, I've given up. We have no idea what people eat. And even if we did know, how are those how are those messages going for you? You should be eating less sugar, to go back to what Bill had to say. So I'm not even sure it helps. So the whole idea in mobile health is that a person is a complex system embedded within other complex systems. And I can give you these slides because I think I'm running out of time. Are you timing me?
Just be more conscious.
Oh, I do? Oh, awesome. Thank you, Bon. Okay, we'll run through this slide then. A person is a complex system, embedded in other complex systems, Many are made up of heterogeneous elements. They interact with one another, and the interactions produce effects that are different from the effects of the individual elements. So there's no such thing as an intervention with one element. And all of the elements, including what you give people to wear or use and what it looks like to them, has an impact. But also the people that are around them are going to have an impact. And the system changes over time, and there are adaptations to changes in the system. So this project is based on a system dynamic model. It's a socially networked model, but think not often what you think of as social networks are, who knows who, and it's are my friends overweight, which makes me more likely to be overweight. But this is also really how do we influence one another's behavior. So, and think of it as like, I'm not allowed to say cascade, what was the side effect say? Anyway, adult one comes home stressed. Does that influence child one's stress levels? And does that then influence the ability for child one to self-regulate? And maybe child 1 and child 2 affect one another? And is there like mimicry in, we're looking at eating behaviors, because the faster you eat, the more likely you are to gain weight. And are people eating in the absence of hunger? And I can show you all of that. But one of the things that we found so far is that daughters are more likely to mimic mothers in speed of eating. Mothers don't mimic daughters, but they sometimes mimic husbands. So there's this dynamic going on, and it depends on the family and the family makeup, but they really do influence how the other person eats. This is my obligatory, fantastic, thank you engineers for making me this drawing situation. But what we're using is in this system is smartphones, smartwatches, microphones in the home, little teeny ones, beacons, ecological momentary assessment, and Cloud-based computing, duh. Okay, I didn't make that slide, but thank you, engineers. So what we know about family eating dynamics and why we decided to attack this is that we know we can change it. Whereas what people eat is really hard to change. But family eating dynamics can now be measured in real time. And we know from other interventions, Leslie Lytle's work, for instance, that we can change it. And I think we could slowly change what people eat, not that Bonnie will talk about that again. Until recently, family eating dynamics were only measurable through interviews, questionnaires, or direct observation. But now we have these systems that we're developing. So the ecological momentary assessment, when we ask people questions, is triggered to sense mood through sound traces. So prosody, we're not using voice, we're not using words, we're just using prosody. This has been really hard, and we've taken this part of this, we've taken out of the field and back into the lab because it's just really hard to do. So this is ideal right now. The rest is getting done. So we can sense eating using a wrist-worn sensor, and that if we know that people are eating and have finished an eating event, then we ask them about eating in the absence of hunger. There's also a rule-based schedule, so if you haven't been beeped about eating so you get a beep an hour for the time that you're home. And if you haven't been beeped about eating, then we get to ask you about mood. And participants can always tell us about their mood or what they're eating, because participants like to talk to you. So we always give them the open window, which means, by the way, if you ever give an open window to participants to let them talk to you, it means, ethically speaking, you have to be monitoring what they say. Because if Jenny says, I'm really depressed, I'm glad you're there and listening to me, I'm going to kill myself at 3 in the afternoon, and you miss that, too. And actually that has happened, not to me, but just so that you know. So what we get, the data that we're getting ubiquitously is who's in the room, who's opening the cabinets and drawers and refrigerator in the kitchen, speaker identification, the length of a meal, and the speed of eating. And what we want to know is, where are you? With whom are you? What's the length of the event? So this is another way of thinking about eating that I never would have thought about if I hadn't been working with a team of fantastic engineers, right? Okay, so the question is, when you get this kind of rich data, what new questions can you ask? And it really takes a transdisciplinary team to think about what variables you have, because these new measures, you're getting measures that we've never gotten before. And we're measuring things. I mean, the thing that I always think of is engagement in games, right? So we used to give people questionnaires. Did you like it? And now, and then I imagine some engineer or game designer woke up in the bathtub, eureka moment, and said, oh, I've got all this back-end data that I've been throwing away. How often did they open the game? How long did they play? You know, so we have variables like that we just haven't even defined yet. I'm going to skip that. So what we should be doing is developing these behavioral assays. And I think that what we need to do is we need these individual models. So no longer theory, but models, something that we can test. And we need to start somewhere. So you've heard this before, I'm going to tell it again. Sorry. But we need to start, I think, with cold models. So a model that's not personalized at all, but from the best knowledge that we have. So maybe an assay for cognitive and emotional, an assay for psychological or physiological variables, a contextualized behavioral index, so context, and social community index for assay. It can change over time. And this is going to give you a somewhat accurate, good start likelihood of a phenomena of interest occurring in an individual. And as you collect data, you warm the model up with the individual data, and you get these indexes again, but this is really matching up to the individual. So for me, for instance, if we think about self-efficacy, for me, self-efficacy, if I'm going to go and do Tai Chi out in the yard, is I don't need it to be really high if it's perfect weather. But if it's super friggin' hot, I need a lot of self-efficacy before I'm going to do that, right? And I also need to put on a lot of sunblock and wear my stupid hat. So, and really it's a sight for sore eyes when you're doing Tai Chi out in the never mind. But then you get, so and this is for me. You know, my Tai Chi master does not need that level of self-efficacy to go out and do it and do Tai Chi with them. So then you get this much more warmed up model. And so what we want to do is we want to go from cold models through these warm models to hot models. There she is. So you start with cold models seeded with knowledge at a group level. These models are warmed up adaptively with an individual data until highly predictive of individual behavior. And then this knowledge is fed back into the originally cold models, but now we have a more sophisticated idea of what variables are and what goes into behavior and behavior change, and that warms it up. And this is the cycle of getting better and better models. Hot models are accurate and adaptive and cute, and they adaptively model dynamic social networks, communities in context, which is the dream. So this is my dream here. Takeaway. Understanding the behavior you choose to intervene on is key. Current and emergent technologies provide the data that you need. These can guide development and testing of any intervention. And the caveat is you need a theory that will guide you on deciding what, when, and how to measure in order to develop a computational model that will guide your intervention. So, what do I mean by understanding behavior? Well, which behavior? Which determinant or measure or mechanism of change? Which theory? Which principles of behavior change, mechanisms of action? Which particular intervention are you going to give to which person? What might work for whom, in which context, and in which dose, and where and when to deliver that intervention? Call me all the time. Thank you.